Good evening, and thank you for attending another virtual Northshire Presents event. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rachel Person. I'm the event manager for Northshire Bookstore in Saratoga Springs, New York. Here, as I so often am, with my good friend and colleague, Dafydd, event manager for Northshire Bookstore in Manchester Center, Vermont. A couple of very quick notes before we get started. First of all, please use the Q&A box that you'll find at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions that you have this evening. You can pose those questions at any time throughout the event. We will be saving them up and we will pose them for you a little bit later on when we get to the audience Q&A at the end of the event. And then also thank you so very, very much for being here and for your incredible loyalty and support over the last couple of years. Indie bookselling is a crazy business. It hasn't been the easiest these last few years, and all of us at Northshire in both stores know that we still exist because of the incredible enthusiasm and loyalty of customers like you. So thank you so very, very much for that. We couldn't do this without you. And now, without further ado, Dafydd is going to introduce our guest this evening.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Good evening. It is my pleasure, my great pleasure, to introduce Christian Dillo tonight for his new book, The Path of Aliveness, Contemporary Zen Approach to Opening Body and Mind. Zenki Christian Dillo Roshi is the resident teacher at Boulder Zen Center. He began his Zen practice in 1996 at the San Francisco Zen Center, and for 20 years he practiced monastically at the Crestone Mountain Zen Center. In 2013, he received a Dharma transmission from Zentatsu Richard Baker Roshi in the lineage of Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. And in 2015, he began serving as the guiding teacher at the Boulder Zen Center. His new book, The Path of Aliveness, offers a path of meaningful transformation tailored to our times through the key practice of embodied aliveness. Zen priest and author Norman Fisher, whom we had the pleasure of hosting a couple years ago on this Zoom event, said that The Path of Aliveness is a daring and breathtaking book, deconstructing and reconstructing Buddhism based on his own experience, his training with Buddhist teachers, and his background in Western phenomenology and psychology. Dillo astutely provides intelligent explanations and detailed practical examples to show us how Zen Buddhism can be, and perhaps always has been, a path to luminously embodied sense of being alive. We are lucky to be joined tonight also by Paul Gyodo Agostinelli, a sensei in the White Plum Zen tradition, founder and spiritual leader of Eon Zen Center in Boulder, and a faculty member at Naropa University, and the founder of Zen at Work. Please join me in welcoming to Northshire Bookstore, Paul Gyodo Agostinelli and Christian Dillo. You'll take it away. Thanks.
Great. Well, really nice to be here. It's a pleasure to be in conversation with Zenki for his new book. I know, Zenki, did you want to start by saying something, or?
No, I'm just maybe thank you for the kind introduction and for being hosted at the Northshire Bookstore. But yeah, take it away. I think we are used to talking to each other, so you have some ideas about the book or some questions. So
very good. Yes, I think hopefully we'll have a stimulating and entertaining conversation about the book, and we look forward to any questions that might come up over the course of our conversation. I've known Zenki for several years now, and we have had the pleasure of seeing each other fairly frequently over those 2 years and discussing Dharma and practice and teaching. And I've loved his book, The Path of Aliveness, which has come out recently. It's excellent, and I hope to bring it more alive. So jumping right in here, Zenki, your book is called The Path of Aliveness. It's an interesting title for a Buddhist book, and at one point you write, in my opinion, the resurgence of Buddhism in the West is an outgrowth of the genuine need of ordinary people within a more secular and rational society to respond to their inmost request to find out what being fully alive means for them. And I just have to say, I agree. This is right on. I think a lot of what has fueled the resurgence of interest in Buddhism in the West, it isn't so much a metaphysical investigation. It isn't so much necessarily an inquiry into an ethical life, although I think that there is a lot to it there. But this quality of what really being fully alive really means is so clear and present for so much of us in the West. So to me, having kind of raised the stakes on what you mean by aliveness, it's actually the core of Buddhism for a lot of us who are seeking in that way. I want to invite you to speak about that. What do you mean by aliveness? What is the importance of bodyfulness for aliveness? What is its relationship to happiness?
Yeah, thank you very much. Already, you know, when I get a question like this, I have to touch base with how I feel about the question. You know, there's already an answer there. You know, we can speak about things from a certain conceptual, logical coherence, or we can touch base with how we feel about something right now. So I think we are in a rational secular society. We have the tendency to get stuck in our conceptual mind and also in our ideological identifications. So I think it's part of our times that we start to have a kind of imperative feeling almost to bring our feelings and our emotions and our situational awareness with us into whatever we're doing. So then for me as a question of practice is how is that possible? How is it possible to live a life that isn't just biologically alive? So, you know, we can measure our brain activity and our heartbeat and so forth, and then we have a relationship to our body as an object. But what's important is to start to actively cultivate our body as a felt space. And so there's a real shift in worldview. You know, we can see the body as an object among other objects. Like, here's my body, and then there are these things in the room, and there's the computer and so forth. And even everything we think about, consciousness, our sense of self becomes an object, and the world becomes this constellation of objects and the relationships among these objects. And to take a different worldview with the body as a felt space is to start to begin to see that everything that appears actually appears within my own mind, we could say, or within my own body mind. So if I look into the scene of what's in front of me, I can have a sense of this is arising through my own sense of aliveness. It's not just there. It's, you know, I have a participatory relationship to it. So bodyfulness is a play with words on mindfulness, because mindfulness, the way it's taught usually now, is like you are noting certain things about what is the case, you know, body sensations, but also thoughts and what you see, what you hear. But I would say instead of just, what I mean by bodyfulness is instead of just attending to the body, we want to learn to attend with the body. So whatever arises in our immediate situation has a resonant feeling in the body. So I want to, in addition to being aware of what is happening in the so-called outside world, I want to also be aware with how it makes me feel, how I'm really resonantly engaged with what appears. So that's kind of my take on bodyfulness. And then you asked about happiness. So the Dalai Lama, I think, says something like, all beings want to be happy. This is just stuck in my mind. And probably that's true. No, but then it's important to ask, what does it really mean? What do we mean by happiness? And I think the ordinary view of happiness is that we want to maximize good feelings. I want to feel good. And if I feel good, I'm happy. So I'm just being very simplistic here. If I feel good, I'm happy. So I want to feel good most of the time. Or why not all of the time? And then we might pursue that for a while and then realize that that's not possible. It's actually completely unrealistic. So what is actually the case? The case is that we have feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, and neither, or neutral, and they're in constant flux. So the truth of being alive is that there are pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings, and they're coming and going. And we can participate in that to some degree, but we can't fully be in control. So to be happy as a way, as an idea of feeling good all of the time is not really possible. So then my idea of being fully alive is actually finding a way to be accepting of, not in resistance of, this constant change of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings, and to develop a mental posture of allowing those feelings to be part of my aliveness, so that I can find out that I can be and feel alive in so-called positive as well as so-called negative emotions. And that's a form of freedom. And if we just start to just use these words more freely, a truer kind of happiness than this pursuit of happiness as feeling good all the time. Mm-hmm. But it requires a deep familiarity with my own bodily existence, because in order to create that space of allowance, I have to start to be kind of fearless about what's arising through my own bodily presence, through my own aliveness, I would say. I need to start feeling like it's okay to have all these feelings come up and bring them with me in a kind of open-minded, allowing space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel you're saying something really important about the feeling sense of what we were really drawn to as human beings. And I agree with you about that. It isn't quite this feeling of happiness that we're drawn to, understood as a continuous sense of pleasure, if you will. Right. In fact, I think when we look at ourselves, we don't really want that. That level, that becomes boring, actually, and we want something richer and deeper. That's really a more engaged relationship with the world. One of the many virtues of your book are these really vivid images, metaphors or pointers to the somatic experience of different mind states. Aliveness being one of them, where you talk about this feeling of like champagne bubbles, moving through your body as one of the images. And that's just it's a beautiful aspect of your book. I want to ask you about a little bit about an even more deeper kind of insight that you have into how sensations are kind of processed or experienced in the body. You speak in a few places about the need to complete and sequence sensations, and that aliveness requires this not to be bypassed or circumvented or interrupted, because nourishment doesn't happen. You can speak more about the deleterious effects of what happens when you don't complete and sequence the sensations. But I found this fascinating, and I would love to hear you say more.
Okay. Yeah, there's a chapter in the book that I think is titled The Path of Nourishment, which I'm thinking of as, Buddhism is, from its inception, its main idea is freedom from suffering. So in the back of my mind is always like, so if you achieve freedom from suffering, what is the positive expression of that freedom from suffering? What is that? And so I named it nourishment, feeling nourished. And I think that's a metaphor that actually comes out of the Chinese Taoist tradition, as far as I can tell, because there is this idea of longevity and how what all is necessary to even longevity, even immortality, what is necessary to continually nourish the human body mind. but what I've come to just from my sort of Western perspective is to say, what's the common denominator of nourishing experiences? And so I say in the book, it's the common denominator is completion. Complete that which appears. So if we look at this, the Zen perspective is to really anchor yourself in this here now moment. And what do you have in this here now moment? You have the six senses and what appears through them. This is basically our world that appears right now. And how can we complete that which appears? So in the book, I make 2 points. There is something we could say, we could call a spatial approach to that completion. And then there's a temporal approach to that completion. And the spatial approach, I think, is quite commonly talked about in the Zen tradition. So I'll start with that. It's like every appearance is this, we could say in a Buddhist jargon, which I'm trying to avoid as much as possible, but it's like it's a dharma. It's a momentary arising. And where does this momentary arising occur? It occurs in a field. So if we're able to not get sucked into this momentary arising and identify with it and try to do something with it and use it for our own pursuit of happiness, but we can instead rest in the field and allow that appearance just to occur. There is a sense of completion there because I'm larger than this momentary appearance. I am that appearance plus the field. So I'm not, for example, if you talk about a common problem that people have these days, anxiety. Anxiety is, let's just say at the core of it, it's an unpleasant sensation that represents uncertainty or something like that. So you feel it somewhere, you feel it in your heart or you feel it in your stomach. And when you can allow that sensation to be there in a larger space of your own mind and awareness, you are creating a kind of more complete situation because you realize I'm not that contracted thing. I'm larger and this is an occurrence within the field. Okay. So that I call a kind of spatial completion. But then, and I think that's more unusual in the Buddhist world, and I think that's what you're asking about, is then there is a listening to body sensations and a kind of open question of how does this sensation want to move forward or sequence into the next moment? So I call that the practice of carrying the present into the present. Because we only live in the present. And so our job at every moment is kind of finding out how do I want to carry the present into the present. And so already the language here is an obstacle. How do I want to carry the present into the present? Is it a self, and is it a decision that's mine that is doing that? Or, and this is coming back to this sense of spatial completion, am I inviting the field? In the Zen tradition, we would talk about the 10,000 things, the innumerable aspects of a live situation. Can I invite them to show me how to carry the present into the present? And in this movement of inviting the field to give some instruction for how to carry the present into the present, I'm calling sequencing in the book, because there's a certain kind of pressure from the present to want to evolve in a certain way. Now, an example I give is, when you are crying, your body is moved through grief or sorrow into a bodily expression of crying. I think we all have that experience, and you can fight that bodily sequencing and try to interrupt it because it's not, the social situation doesn't really allow it, and so forth. And then you push a certain demand that the body has for sequencing, you push it aside. So what is it like to allow that kind of arc of bodily expression, now in the example of crying, to really just unfold? So, but I don't think of it just in terms of emotional sequencing, but also a sequencing of a thought, an idea, you know, what I'm doing right now. How am I allowing certain ideas to unfold in a way that is understandable as I'm listening to myself, to me, and also to someone else, you know, as I'm taking in how you react. Are there signs that it's landing with you, and so forth? So this is also sequencing. So then I'm thinking about that just in a way, in an abstract way, but then we could look at every situation in our life and say, are we doing this sequencing in a way that feels nourishing? And if it's not nourishing, we can sort of pause a little bit and say, like, what's happening here? Why does this feel off? Where have I not allowed something to sequence? For example, have I not given space to somebody who has to say something important in the situation? You know, that would be interrupting a sequence that wants to unfold, and so forth. So the examples are, you know, endless.
Really wonderful how you speak about this. I don't know what the experience of the audience is, but a lot of times Buddhist teachers or meditation teachers will talk about these types of things as feel your feelings fully, or notice the rising and falling of sensation and where they lead, okay? But I feel like you've almost cast an even deeper X-ray on the architecture of what's going on with body-mind through these things, and you've really connected it to what we're all looking for, which is this deeper sense of aliveness. And it's just extremely powerful the way you describe it. I want to take advancing that a little bit. You have this this notion of mental postures that I find really helpful and quite innovative in talking about it. Meditation teachers and instructors say a lot about physical posture. Those who have taken basic meditation classes will get instruction on that. But although it is latent within the teachings of Zen, you come out with a really nice categorical kind of pointers and prescriptions about these mental postures that support the physical posture in a way that we get right at the sources of aliveness and the hindrances to aliveness. So I wonder if you could say a bit about your mental postures and how they work and why they're so important.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for the question. You know, it's not that new, you know. Mental posture is a word, or is a phrase. You could also speak about attitudes or views. But I think what's happening with the word posture is that it makes an immediate connection to the body. When you say view or you say attitude, it sounds mental and somewhat divorced from the body. This is just the way our culture has gone. This isn't like anybody's fault. So I think the word mental posture here is helpful because it makes a connection with the body. So in a way, I'm thinking about, with mental postures, I'm thinking about attitudes. Or if I dissolve that into other words, how you hold your mind. Like the way you hold your body, how do you hold your mind? That's your mental posture. So then I think mental postures are kind of like, in the end, conceptual frameworks that govern how we think and speak and emote and act. And they can be quite deep, you know, they can be very culturally trained, therefore non-conscious to us and habituated, and they can be dysfunctional in the way that they leave us unnourished or, you know, not feeling alive. Or from a Buddhist point of view, we can now find out what are these mental postures that really help us to transform in the direction of liberation, wisdom, and compassion. That's the way I say, like, okay, this is really what Buddhism is about. Buddhism is about a transformative path that allows us to evolve in the direction of more freedom, wisdom, and compassion. Okay, so then I think it's actually a very open question. What are these mental postures that are really helpful? And the Buddhist tradition is full of them. You know, at one point, you and I talked about the paramitas not long ago, you know, generosity or discipline, patience, those are mental postures. But I'm thinking in the book also about, I give examples like a worldview where you have a sense that space separates, you know, I'm here and you're over there. That's a mental posture where, you know, we are separated by space. And I could turn that around and say space connects. And we're actually connected by space. Well, then, you know, something happened. There's a transformation right there that just comes from changing that mental orientation, or as you point out, as I like to say, the posture. Okay, so that's one take on it. Another take is that these East Asian yogic traditions, I think, have a basic worldview in which all physical phenomena have a mental component and all mental phenomena have a physical component. Therefore, in Zen, we start with the body and we trust that when we start with the posture of the body, it will affect our mental posture. When you start to feel how your mental posture is shifting, then that then also affects the body again. You know, the mental posture then has an influence on the bodily posture. So, for example, when in meditation you are asked not to move, practice the mental posture of stillness. We start with a physical posture of stillness. We say, don't move the body. And then you develop a feeling for how the mind is invited into stillness by the stillness of the body. And as the stillness of the mind develops, it invites the body into deeper stillness. So you have this, you can really experientially have an insight into the relationship between physical and mental posture. So then and then in the book, I go through other mental postures like non-reactivity, which is, you know, makes, in effect for me, it's like having a spacious mental posture in which that which appears can just appear and I don't need to react to it. You know, just like the meditation instruction for that would be don't scratch. Don't scratch the body, but in your mind also don't scratch that thought, don't scratch that emotion, don't scratch that physical sensation from the inside. Remain unmoved and therefore experience an openness in your mind, you know. But then from there, we can then experiment with, okay, so what is it like, say, to practice kindness? What kind of mental posture is that? So in the book, for example, I define kindness as making space for what appears and adding a little bit of warmth. So this is just my way of trying to come to describe these mental postures in a way that we can feel, that has an anchor in the body.
And I'm curious, right at that last point, is the pointer to experience warmth in a particular place? in your body?
Yes and no. So sensations that arise in the body are always arising in a particular location. There is nothing abstract about it. Right? When a sensation arises, it arises in the area we call the heart. Or the sensation arises in the area you call the solar plexus. Or the sensation arises all over the body. Or you mentioned these champagne bubbles that I use, as a metaphor. One way I describe that feeling is also the joy of being alive for no other reason than being alive. When we're settled enough in our bodies, arriving there, not being too concerned about certain intensities that arise in the shoulders or in your back, or what we would call emotional pain. Underneath all that, there is this, what I call the buzz of basic aliveness, just the fundamental feeling of being alive. And this was a big insight for me at one point, is like, wow, that's joyful in itself, to feel that buzz, just to be alive for no other reason than being alive. And that's a different kind of joy than, happiness or excitement, or what our culture tries to make of this joy. You have to be like, has to be great or something. So it's a quiet joy. But when you ask about warmth is like that. It's sort of like, it's a very quiet feeling of having a warm feeling toward life. Your own aliveness, the way other people appear in your field of awareness and demonstrate that they're alive too, to feel that resonance, that kind of warmth is all over. But when I feel the pain, of like grief that is actually, centered here in my heart, let's say, then I want to bring that warmth to that location too, very intentionally, and say like, hey, I'm going to meet this with this kind of warmth. So that's why I say yes and no. It's all over, and it's also localized if you make it so.
Yeah, beautiful. Again, I'm appreciating even more now, Zenki, how you make this practice very continuously workable, a very pliable and tactile sense of meeting a practice moment by moment. And going back to your last answer, you talked about how mental postures in effect can be something like, well, I'm separate from other beings and things. And previous languaging of Zen would be something like, well, you have a fixed belief around that, or a fixed view around that, and you need to drop that or experience things differently, going back to that earlier language you were talking about. But like you say, that isn't helpful to keep it in the abstract conceptual realm, because it's not actually workable in that place. And you're really connecting the dots between this fuzzy intermixed zone of body and mind and how things work there. So from the moment of sitting down in a meditation posture practice, I want to say begins, but it's already begun. It can already begin. Every moment you can really pay attention to this dance of mind and body. So I'm really appreciating that, and how you bring that alive for us. We have a few more minutes, I think, in our exchange here, and I wanted to invite you to share a little bit about not knowing, which is the not knowing mind that we talk about in Zen. It's something to cultivate. It's something that gives us access to a world which is withdrawn from us, as you say. And it is the kind of source of a type of wisdom. You also have as with everything, a kind of a elaboration or examples of the felt sense of not knowing, and how that can be practically practiced and experienced in everyday life. So perhaps you can share about that.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that question. You know, there's a famous line in a koan, I forget now exactly where, but Nanshan, isn't that, no, anyway, I'm not gonna try to be accurate here, but it's, the path is neither in knowing nor not knowing. Knowing is false consciousness, not knowing is indifference. Right? I think that's what the line is. So this is interesting. Knowing and not knowing are in a relationship with each other. You can't say like, oh, we're going to practice not knowing and arrive there and then something is complete. So I'm thinking of not knowing as an antidote to knowing, which the koan line phrases as false consciousness. Okay. So what is that in our experience? So if you have a certain view or you have a position, you are occupying a conceptual position. We see this now, for example, how it plays out with abortion, you know, hot topic. We have two positions. We have pro-life and pro-choice. And so then we can observe right now in real time how people get identified with a position. This is when we're just practicing with ourselves without trying to solve a political problem right now. This means like I'm taking hold of a conceptual position and I identify with it and I'm calling it right. Yeah? So that's knowing that something is right or knowing that something is wrong. It happens all the time. I mean, this is a very pronounced example now that affects the whole society, but it, you know, just every belief that we have is that kind of knowing. What does it feel like? I'm really asking very specific. What does it feel like to let go of that identification, that tight holding, to open the hand of knowing? And where do you go when you release your identification with a certain concept as a belief? And I think where you end up is a much less defined space. It's like, you don't end up immediately on the other side, the opposite of that. You actually are in a fuzzy space, which can be very disconcerting. It's like, wow, I don't know I don't know what's right. I don't know what's wrong. I mean, so most people don't want to be in that space. That's the first thing to observe. It's like, this is uncomfortable to have that much uncertainty about, you know, almost anything. Okay, so not knowing, I think, involves, first of all, the ability or the willingness to hang out in that space of suspending identification with certain concepts. But then, this is my bias maybe, we are not just in an empty space when we do that. Yes, in that space, many more possibilities arise. I could see it this way, I could see it that way, you know. I could see it both ways, neither, you know, those are the four positions, a certain kind of teaching, Zen or Buddhism. But there's also something, we are always contextualized in the situation that we're in. we're not just neutral observers that have choices about everything sort of randomly. And this is something that I'm calling the felt sense. The situation manifests in us as a felt sense. That's one way I could say it right now. I feel oriented in this room, not everything is possible. I can't just lift off the ground. I know in my body that gravity is happening, not through the concept, but I can feel it. I can't just take off and fly off into space. But this is true for certain sequencings in real life too. Things have to develop in a certain order in order to develop. You can't just go from being sick to being healthy in one instant, right? There is a process of healing. When you want to bring people along for a project, there's a process of consensus building. It doesn't happen like this. So we know that. How do we know it? And there I would say we don't know it conceptually. We know it as a felt sense. And when we drop from knowing into not knowing, we are inviting a different kind of knowing, which I'm now calling the felt sense, a term that I'm gladly borrowing from Eugene Gentlin, who I think is a brilliant thinker of our times. The 20th century, he died in the early 21st century, but anyway, he's one of my intellectual heroes because he really investigates this interface between the body and the mind. So let me say that again. If we release conceptual knowing and identifications, we can say, oh, we're going in the direction of not knowing. But that kind of not knowing is a knowing that is of a different kind, that has a bodily component. And how to engage that bodily component, I think that's when we are in the territory of wisdom. Because wisdom is not just thinking brilliantly about this and that conceptually with clarity, which also has its virtues, but it is knowing situations through this felt sense, which isn't stuck in concepts. Okay. To stop here.
Really, really wonderful. Yeah. So I think we're at our time of moving into our Q&A, and here's Rachel and Dafydd.
Yes, thank you both so much. This has been fantastic. We've got a question here from Corey. So please, anyone else, if you have any other questions, please type them into the Q&A box. Corey wants to know, in my practice, I'm finding it so helpful to pay attention to arising feeling tones. Do feeling tones form a part of your background for understanding aliveness at a deeper level?
Yeah, so I assume, that the tip of, maybe you can help me out here, Gyodo, but feeling tones is usually, pleasant, unpleasant, neither or something. We have certain names for those feeling tones. Maybe we can bring other concepts in, but what I want to always differentiate is when you practice with feeling tones, are you practicing with the interpretation of your sensations, or are you practicing with the raw sensations themselves? So, for example, when I feel something in my body that I call, I'm speaking very carefully here. When I feel something in my body, sensations in my body that I call anxiety, then anxiety is already an interpretation of the sensations that I'm feeling. Right? So when I call sensations that I feel in my body unpleasant, unpleasant is already an interpretation of what I'm actually feeling. when I have the practice of releasing all interpretation whatsoever, and I basically put myself into a space of not knowing what these sensations really are, then unpleasant sensations become a kind of energy. It's like, I don't call them unpleasant, but they are manifesting as part of my aliveness. And then I'm able to move through them in a more alive way. That's my experience, because I am removing this categorization from them. So this is a suggestion that I have, like whenever you practice with something like feeling tones, be clear about, do you practice with the interpretation of what you're feeling, or are you practicing with the feelings themselves? Do you have something to say about that, Gyodo?
I might answer a little differently based on a different understanding of feeling tones. So I'm not sure exactly, Corey, what you meant by it, but thanks, Corey, appreciated that answer. I would just add quickly, if feeling tones were more like undertone, it was actually another subtle layer of sensation or feeling that kind of went along with the main current, if you will, then I would say it is helpful to pay attention to those subtle layers of sensation.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. The next question comes from Jay, asking, when the term transformation comes up, I feel it's more somber when used in a figurative sense. Otherwise, if you suggest literal transformation, that makes the listener fall too easily into magical thinking. Are we really talking about a fundamental change?
Well, you know, it's all words, right? What's fundamental? I don't know. I think we're talking about a fundamental change. Fundamental in the sense that it really has a big effect on everything. Now, to make this accessible and not drift into jargon, which is always what I'd like to do, is you can look at anything as an appearance within a field, a content within a field. Body sensations, we've talked about those quite a bit here, arise within a larger field of awareness. Visual content arises within the larger field of awareness. Sounds arise in the larger field of awareness. Do you live your life focused on these contents, and you're dealing with them, and you're trying to manipulate them, and you're trying to arrange the contents so that you feel better or think that your life is going well? Or are you finding a way to live through the field in which everything appears? Now, when that possibility shows up for the first time, it's a big liberative step. It's like, wow, I am this whole field of awareness and everything appears within it, something like that. That's a kind of opening experience. And then I think it's a lifelong practice to realize that this can be a continuous orientation to sort of walk through the world and feel like you're hosting all this content. So are you more the field in which the content appears, or are you one of the contents that's wrestling with these other contents? So so this is what I call, this is one way to talk about transformation. Okay, is this fundamental? Yeah, I think it's pretty fundamental. It's a new way of being alive. It's a different way of being not just in the world, but being with the world, or be the world, you know. But I don't want to make it somber. I don't quite know how you meant the question, Jay, but it's not like we don't have to attach a big religious feeling to it. I'm happy to look at this just as being practical, you know, like, what does it mean to be really free? what does it mean to access your deepest sense of wisdom? You know, what does it mean to be so deeply in resonance with the world that you can say, yeah, I feel with everything. You know, all of this comes from this kind of transformation.
Thank you. I've got a question DM'd to me from an anonymous audience member. They ask, what do you recommend for someone just starting out, interested in turning to Buddhism or mindfulness and battling anxiety? Any recommendations?
I didn't quite, what about anxiety?
Someone who is battling anxiety and interested in using mindfulness or Buddhism to help with that.
Yeah, a very important question. Now, this basically, you know, I want to say something practical, but I would need to know you, this anonymous questioner, a bit better. But there's a deeper question enfolded in this very common question. When you're battling anxiety, you're describing a form of suffering. The Buddhist path is about ending suffering. But we also have a Western approach to ending suffering, and we call that psychotherapy, you know, basically. So there's a decision here to make. Is, you know, how are you going to approach this? Are you going to approach it through Buddhist practice, or are you going to approach it through psychotherapy, or both? Or neither. That's a possibility too. But let's just say one or the other or both. You need to make this decision. How do you make this decision? Probably by experimenting. No, just experiment. Maybe you approach it also through kind of medical approach with medication. Right. Okay, so what is the Western approach about? The Western approach, and I'm simplifying and here and making it sort of contrasting. The Western approach is something like, I have these unpleasant feelings that I call anxiety, and I want to find a way to not feel them so much, or hopefully not at all going forward. So we're trying to find a way to alleviate or get rid of these sensations. And we can get rid of them maybe by numbing them to a certain degree, changing the chemical, the chemistry of the brain and nervous system and so forth. Or we can approach it through what are the conditionings in my life, and how can I disentangle these conditionings so that I don't feel this anxiety somewhere. Then we are in the territory of psychotherapy. The Buddhist approach is, and mindfulness that belongs to it, is somewhat different. It's like you want to first learn to really separate the sensations you call anxiety from all the interpretations you have about these sensations. Am I making sense here? So it's already built into my language. There are sensations. Where do you feel them? Where exactly do you feel them? How intense are they? In your solar plexus, in your heart, all over the body. You track with mindfulness, or bodyfulness, as I like to say, where these sensations occur, how intense they are under certain conditions. And you develop the stability of mind to just be with those sensations without letting them freak you out. This takes time. I'm not saying this is easy, but I know from my own experience that it's possible. So it's like to translate this, you find a way to be experience yourself as larger than these sensations that you call anxiety. Okay, then you can ask questions like, are these, to have these sensations, is that really a fundamental problem? And I know most people who battle anxiety think, yes, it is a fundamental problem. But now, like, have this much openness of mind and say, is it really a fundamental problem to off and on, and maybe even persistently feel these sensations that I call anxiety? And what has been really helpful for me is to say, anxiety is an adequate expression of uncertainty. This is a reframe of what's really going on. When we don't know what's coming, like let's say I need to perform, like here, you know, there's a webinar, I need to show up. I don't know how it's gonna go. I'm gonna feel a little nervous or anxious about it. Well, this is completely normal, right? It's an adequate representation of not knowing, of having this uncertainty about the situation. So this is a reframe that can be liberating in the sense that you start to allow what you call anxiety to be an expression of your aliveness. And then, you know, we have this saying, what you resist persists, right? But there's the other side of that saying is, the less you resist the sensations that you call anxiety and give them space and warmth and allow them to be there as an adequate representation of uncertainty, the less they will persist. The less they have to remind you that it's appropriate to give them space. So we need to experiment with whether this approach really works for us. You can try that out with some guidance. And then at the same time, you could take a psychotherapeutic approach and work with someone on what are the conditions of my, you know, life so far that has led me to develop this pattern of recurring sensations that I call anxiety. So I think they actually both are valid approaches, and they could even be worked with in a complementary fashion.
Christian, Paul, thank you so much, both of you. This has been a wonderful evening. I'm afraid we're out of time. The book is The Path of Aliveness. You can order it at northshire.com. There's a link in the chat. And thank you both so much for this evening. It's been really wonderful.
Well, let me say thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure to speak here, appear, and thank you, Gyodo, for engaging me in such an alive way. It's always a pleasure to talk with you about these things.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone who attended and joined us this evening. We'll see you at another Northshire event soon. Take care, everyone, and good night.
Okay, bye-bye.